Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Southeast Regional Row Crop Initiative Cotton and Grain Marketing Report. My name is Matt Boucher. I am the County Extension Agent, Agriculture in Victoria County, and my friend and co-host is Bobby McCool. He's the County Extension Agent in San Patricio County, and we're glad that you're here. We're glad that you're with us. So we appreciate you, and we appreciate your attendance, and we want to thank those folks that bring us this event every month, and that's a Texas Corn Producers Board, and the Cotton Board. We greatly appreciate their support and sponsorship and ongoing sponsorship. We've been doing this a long time now, so their continued support is what makes us able to put this on each month for y'all. So we're going to kick it off this morning. Lots of really interesting information happening around the world in the cotton and grain markets, and we certainly want to get to all of that, and we will. We're going to start with Dr. John Robinson, Extension Economist, and he will be the one that will lead us in that direction. So, John, if you're ready, go for it.
All right, thank you.
I see it. You just have to play the show now. There you go. You're ready to go. Take it away.
Thank you. So I'm going to talk about the supply and demand. Well, really the demand and supply things going on. So from a demand standpoint, we have really for the last year, we've had, I'd say, pretty strong demand for cotton, as evidenced by strong U.S. export sales. We had a recovery in apparent recovery in world mill use, and that's what this chart here. Actually, that's not what this chart is showing, but the mill use graph looks exactly like this. There's a great big V-shaped recovery in cotton consumption, of the consumption of physical cotton, the bales that go to textile mills. That fell off during the pandemic recession, and it has recovered. And so has this is a graph of retail sales of clothing, and it shows the same thing, a great big dip back when we were sitting at home, not going to work, not going to school, not buying clothes, and a recovery in that. But now, what I'd say on the demand side for cotton is that we have a new problem, or a new threat to consumption of clothing, cotton, apparel, sheets and towels and things like that. The new threat to the demand side is this question of what is going to happen to household discretionary spending if we're paying $4 a gallon for gas, and pretty soon we might be making larger car payments and house payments, and we're paying more for the essentials, for food, for gas. Will that crimp household discretionary spending? And if it does, then I expect people like me are still going to put gas in their car, and I'm still going to eat, but I don't need to go buy a new wardrobe. And so it almost puts us in this inflation, stagflation threat, puts us kind of back into a new and different kind of recessionary potential impact on demand. So we haven't seen that yet in terms of cotton consumption. Hasn't been affected, but it's sort of an emerging issue. The question, what's going to happen to this trend line right here? So that's something that we're kind of watching for as we go forward. Of course, most eyes and thoughts these days are on the supply side of all these crops. So, we've had a number of different acreage surveys for U.S. cotton for the 22 crop, and the earliest one predicted 12.5 million, and the Cotton Council number came out at 12 million. And then more recently, USDA came out with a guesstimate. Those previous two things were based on surveys. The USDA Outlook Forum, they simply took the latest survey, the Cotton Council survey, and they added to it to account for the drought effect. So they said, yeah, all right, we might have 12 million planted for economic reasons, and then we're going to add an extra 750,000 acres due to what I'll call the drought effect. It's sort of more or less been this way. All these acre surveys were giving us 12-something million, and the council sort of just reinforced, not the council, the USD Outlook Forum reinforced that. And here in the last month, since this war broke out, and Dr. Welch will talk more about this, since wheat prices have exploded and grain prices and oilseed prices have just marched on up there, the economics influences on the acreage question have changed. And they have this is how I measure things and predict acreage. We've got cotton acreage over here. We've got different years. So there's 2020, there's 2021, 2019, 2018. That's how much we planted with cotton. And down here, we've got the ratio of corn prices to cotton prices. And for most of the first quarter of the year, this ratio has been about 5.7 to 5.9. It's been right in here where I'm moving this arrow. And it would predict that it would predict the figures that we've seen in the other surveys. It would predict that historically we would be on this trend line right about here, and we'd be planting somewhere between 12 and 13 million. Well, with the explosion in grain and oilseed prices because of the Ukraine-Russia situation, the corn prices are higher relative to cotton prices. This is where they were a couple of days ago. And so the ratio is now, instead of 5.8 or 5.7, it's 6.3, and it's way over here. And again, so history would suggest now, if people can make adjustments this late in the game, and I realize people, Matt, in your world are planting, at least they're planting grains. But anyway, the emphasis or the influence now would be towards fewer cotton acres, maybe somewhere between 11 and 11.5 million, if people can adjust to these prices, and that we'd have more feed grains and maybe hold on to more wheat if such a thing's possible. I don't know if the weather will let anybody do that. But anyhow, I would adjust my balance sheet and my forecasting, my prediction of cotton supply and demand to account for a little bit less planted at this point if prices stay in that relationship. If that's the case, then maybe 12 million is the most that we'll see planted. And if that's the case, then we'll probably have 20% of that abandoned. So we might have a lower harvested acres number. And if you punch all that through, we might only have a crop size around 17 million instead of 18 million. So we're basically cutting off 1 million bales out of this supply projection. And that basically just tightens up the bottom line. So whereas last year we had 3.5 million bales of ending stocks, now we might have 3 or less. And that will tighten things up from a price standpoint. That'll probably support new crop cotton futures, around $1. They might have support levels there. And then the weather market that we're in and that we're going to enter more between now and August, I would say futures could get pushed up by the speculators. I would expect we'd get prices pushed up to $1.10 to $1.15 and pushed towards $1.20 particularly through the third quarter of the year. So prices supported at $1 and a lot of upside volatility. And I don't want people to forget that there's also downside risk too. And the downside risk in this situation would be, first of all, the mills have more cotton on order because they're not getting it all delivered to them. Well, if they can get it all delivered to them, that is to say, if the supply chain situation gets fixed, then there'll probably be a lull in export demand because these people will have all that delivered to them and they won't need to order some for a while. Anyway, that's kind of a futuristic expectation. If conditions are good the way they were in 2021, then that could take some of the wind out of the sails the market. In fact, is that could lead to a sell-off in the hedge funds. And then, like I was saying before, if discretionary spending by consumers is pinched because of inflation, that could hurt cotton demand too. I think that's where I'll leave it, Matt. So I'll hang around on the call and be available for questions. There we go.
Very good. Thank you very much. Very good information. So we're going to move right along to you, Dr. Welch. Dr. Mark Welch is an extension economist with the Texas A&M AgriLife Extension, and he will dive into the beginning of the grain market. So Dr. Welch, take it away.
All right. Thank you, Matt. I hope you can see those slides and hear me okay.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Of course, boy, what a difference a month makes. Those charts, I'm going to talk primarily about the wheat market and the corn market today, given the impact of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. And so glad to see Wayne Cleveland participating here today to bring in the sorghum perspective. Those charts go back to about Valentine's Day, and we've seen the nearby wheat contract. That's $8 on the bottom. Ran that thing up to almost $13 a bushel. If you look at corn on the right-hand side, we're talking about $6.40 corn, almost up to $8 corn. So certainly some dramatic impacts with what's going on over between Russia and Ukraine. And just to put that in perspective, just a little bit, these charts, it's a little bit dated. Data is from 2019. That box on the left, that's 100% of Russia's exports, and then divided in percentage terms among major products. You can see that the primary exports out of Russia are in that energy category, petroleum, natural gas, refined petroleum products. But if you move out of the energy sector, the next largest component is down there in the bottom in the middle, and that would be the vegetable products category, dominated by wheat. Over on the right-hand side, those are export destinations, the largest trading partners with Russia, again, a la 2019. China being their number one trading partner. Then we move into Europe with the number one country being the Netherlands, followed closely by Belarus, Germany, Italy, and so forth. So that's their primary exports. But look a little bit more at that vegetable product category. It's obviously dominated by wheat, but Russia is also the number one exporter in sunflowers. They're number 3 in barley. They're number 4 in corn. They're even number 8 in soybeans. Now, that's not a lot of soybeans, but yet this conflict is affecting Russian agricultural production is a major impact on world grain markets. This is where their export destinations for wheat and corn on the left-hand side. They primarily ship that wheat to places like Egypt and Turkey, and then other nations in that Northern Africa and Middle Eastern region. When it comes to corn, again, they're not a big corn exporter in terms of total number of bushels, but they are number 4 in the world. And those export destinations primarily being Iran and Turkey. Putting that in perspective of global major producers, Russia accounts for about 10% of global wheat production, Ukraine about 4%. So we've got a significant amount of trade, of production that's being impacted. Now in terms of trade, world wheat exports, Russia accounts for about 16% of world wheat exports. That's estimated for the current marketing year, and Ukraine about 10%. Now, putting in context perhaps some long-term impacts of this conflict, I think what will be interesting to see and the impact on the markets will be to the degree of does this conflict escalate to such a point that both nations restrict the exports of food and grain like they have in the short term during the midst of this conflict right now. Both countries have placed some restrictions on the exports of food products and grain. Will that continue into the new marketing year? And I think it seems much more likely that if we are to receive grain flows out of that part of the world, yeah, we're likely to lose Ukraine, perhaps completely, as a participant in the global trade of wheat and corn, but less likely that we would lose Russia completely. If Russia has excess supply of grain, it would seem that they would still be able to access global markets because they control the area. They control the ports. They control the shipping lanes. Might they have other outlets and transportation modes in which they could still participate? Again, keeping in mind where most of their grain flows would go. And so if we lose them, both countries completely, certainly the impacts are much more serious. I think it's likely that Russia may still participate to some degree in the new crop year. And if that is the case, I think longer term, the impact on the global grain market will be much more severe in the corn market than it is in the wheat market, in that Russia accounts for a higher percentage of global wheat exports than they do corn. So if we were to, and if we lose Ukraine, they contribute a higher percentage of world corn participation. We'll see that in the next charts. So Russia accounts for about the combined, we're talking about 6% of global wheat exports. But again, will Russia be shut out completely? I think it's the main question looking down the road. Corn production, yeah, Ukraine, we're only talking about 3% in Ukraine, 1% in Russia of global corn production. But then if you look at exports, now Ukraine is accounting for about 14% of global corn exports. And if we think about their inability perhaps to plant a crop this spring, and if they put some type of ban on exports of wheat and corn out of Ukraine, if we lose Ukraine in the global corn market, who's going to make up the slack? Where will we make up that 27.5 million metric tons? Yeah, we could bring some back in the U.S. But if you look at the other major exporters, Argentina is kind of back where they would normally be. Brazil, we're already expecting a big increase from Brazil this year. How much more can they account for? It would seem very difficult that we can make up what we would use from Ukraine, backing up on wheat. If we were trying to make up what we lose in Ukraine, that 20 million metric tons, where could that come from? Well, we're down 10 million metric tons in Canada this marketing year compared to last year, given the short spring wheat crop that we had in 2021. There's 10 million metric tons right there if we just bring Canada back. The US, we're down about 5 million metric tons. So we have more ability to, I think, respond in the wheat export space. But when it comes to corn, the loss of Ukrainian production is going to be hard to make up. And so does the current price movement, this is the harvest time contract for 2022, is over there on the right-hand side at $12.30 a bushel. That's the July contract. We are approaching the all-time record high that we saw on that July contract back in 2008. If the chart down there at the bottom, just running a little quick kind of back of the envelope math, if we took the 2021-22 marketing year, project those numbers out for 2022, except remove Russia and Ukraine from the world wheat participation completely, take them out, no production, no exports. They're basically just removed from the equation. That would tighten, and everything else remains the same, which it won't. But for simplicity's sake, the other supply and use numbers stay the same. That would put stocks to use ratio for world wheat back down to about an 80.4 day supply. If we took Russia and Ukraine again out of the equation, that gets us back to about as tight as we were back in 2008. So there would be a fundamental reason to see wheat prices surging back up to those levels. Again, I think it's highly unlikely that we would see Russia removed completely from that equation. And then also, of course, there will be some other adjustment factors given these record high prices. But I think, again, to put some kind of fundamental perspective on how prices are responding in the wheat market. Now we're going to do the same thing for corn. This is the December corn contract. The record highs in that, again, 2008, we hit $8 a bushel. In 2012, with the drought, we hit $8.40 a bushel. At this point, the December contract, we're $6.40, $6.50 a bushel is about as high as we've hit on the 22 contract. But if we were to remove Russia and Ukraine, and of course, Russia doesn't matter as much in the world corn market, but taking out, again, both of those countries, production and exports, we dropped that days of use on hand back to a 74.4 day supply. That gets us back to about as tight as we were in 2012. So as this plays out this spring and through the expectations for this new marketing year, I think we've got more room to run as this conflict, if it were to continue, continue to escalate, continue to spread, that we've got more topside potential on the corn market at this point, in that we could take a run at those record high prices. So certainly, I think that if we were to sign some kind of ceasefire, some movement toward an agreement today, it would still take time to restore something that looks like normal in terms of production in that part of the world, restoring trade. So I think we've got a considerable amount of risk that still exists, particularly in the corn market at these prices, that depending on how this plays out this spring. Again, both nations have announced some type of restrictions for old crop activity. What's going to happen to the new crop? They've got a wheat crop out there that needs to be top dressed. They got to control the weeds, the pests, the diseases. Will they be able to gather that wheat crop, even if they don't export it, just for their own internal use? And then what about corn? Will they be able to get in the field? And again, if they resolve this situation in just within a few weeks or a few months, is that too late for the 2022 corn crop? Again, will Russia still participate in the grain market? And if they have that desire to participate, will the financial relationships and mechanisms be such that you can even get paid? That's beyond me of how that all works and how those funds are transferred. But will those financial restrictions, in effect, limit the ability to trade on the global marketplace? In addition to weather, that part of the world is a major exporter of fertilizer products. And so we know the prices are high, but what about availability? If producers around the world can't get the inputs they need to reach their productive potential in 2022, and talking about primarily places like Brazil, which count much more heavily on imported fertilizer than we do here in the U.S. It matters here, but it matters all over the world, places like India and Europe. And then, of course, if you take Russia and Ukraine from the equation, fundamentally, we would expect, as we've seen in wheat, that the corn might still challenge those record highs that we saw in 2008 and 2012. But again, I think the consequences of this conflict longer term may be more important for corn. We may have seen the primary price reaction in wheat. Corn is the one that I'm really concerned about at this point. So that's what I brought to share today. I appreciate your time. Again, I'll be glad to be hanging around too if there's any questions or comments that come up, and appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this. Matt, thanks for having us.
Thank you very much. Very, very interesting information, something we hadn't seen in a long time. So thank you for bringing that, sharing that this morning. I think probably Wayne's going to touch a little bit on that too, on the grain sorghum side. So our next speaker is Mr. Wayne Cleveland. He's Executive Director for Texas Sorghum Producers Board. I think, Wayne, you were able to switch computers, and if you're ready, take it away, Wayne.
Okay, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
I'm in the most bougie of places, a 7-Eleven, filling up with diesel, so I apologize for that. Are you guys, can you see my screen share from here, Matt?
I cannot see it yet.
Let's see, let me get down here. Share screen, there we go. All right. Sorry about that.
It's coming through. Okay, I see it now. And you just need to do, play the show.
Play there.
And you're good to go. Yes, sir.
So appreciate you guys indulging me here. We've got a whole lot of things going on in our world, sorghum world. I can say that things are really good right now. USDA moved the index price up to 585 last week. So we're seeing an extreme demand for grain sorghum. I'll point out some of these things down there in my slides a little more as far as supply and demand and what we think is still out there as far as this year, which is kind of unique for sorghum to actually be out of a commodity. But this picture was taken last week. I think this is a lot of things in there, kind of in the front and the back as well. This is a group from China. They have a business in Houston. They're energy traders or soybean traders primarily. The lady there in the blue is the interpreter. They were frantically looking for grain sorghum. I mean, they say we're just going where we think there's grain sorghum. and they're one of the major exporters of soybeans in China, and we were able to sit and visit with them for a couple of hours. It's funny because I started forwarding them contacts of people that could actually sell them grain sorghum, and as I forwarded those contacts, they would hit the button on their phone and actually call them. And one of them thought I was being held hostage because this lady in a very thick Chinese accent is saying, "We want sorghum, we want sorghum." And the guy goes, "Wayne, are you okay?" It was pretty funny, but also in the back, the sorghum sustains, I think, is a great kind of overall context for this, because you guys are keenly aware of the drought that's going on. You're aware of everything in the world that's going on, and sorghum fits. When everything's really bad, sorghum's really good. And I don't know how else to say that. If there's a drought, sorghum usually it's a little easier on the water consumption. Of course, we can be planted late. We have that 90 to 120 day option. So sorghum world looks good. These guys are all smiles. They'll be at our annual meeting next week, which you guys are invited. I'll pop that up towards the end, but they're coming next week. We have folks there that can also trade grain, so they're most excited to meet them in person. They did have a one-on-one conference. Just real quick, I know Mark touched on this, but I love this graphic that kind of puts in perspective wheat, corn, and barley, where they are as far as a global trade. The blue portion down at the bottom is Ukraine. The red is Russian. I'm no expert on that, but I wanted to just put into context the significance of what this means. Number one, for wheat and corn, but also what's notably missing from here is sorghum. So there's no sorghum trade that goes into that world, that Black Sea region. Of course, the Strait of Bosphorus there, or the Turkish Straits as they're called. That's going to be, if I had to watch one thing here, and I had some money in the game, I would be watching to see what the Turks allow to go through those straits, because the Black Sea region is so important for that part of the world, and it's in disruption. I'm being told that the ship channels are open, but the insurers will absolutely not allow any ships to go in or come out of that facility there in the Ukraine. So here's the big thing. You guys take a look at 2023 over there. We haven't really sold anything forward to next year forward contracted, but take a look at those numbers of 2022 buys. We're at 262.8 million bushels, and USDA has us projected at 310. This is like 5 months into the marketing year, guys. So we have very little to go there to meet our WASDE expectations. We think there's basically no grain sorghum left in the world. Again, here you can see the purchase commitments versus 2021 versus 2022. So we're running about 10% of where we were this time last year, which I think is really good, given that you're probably seeing some demand rationing out there. And then you can see the totals over there to the right. These are some interesting things that are going on here. This top graph is our production ship current, remaining marketing year, domestic in stocks. Domestic use would be, of course, ethanol, but what's pretty auspicious here is the lack of shipments. We need to get grain sorghum out of the United States. We do have time to do that. Corn sometimes runs a little dicey on that, just because of sheer volume. We're obviously a lot smaller volume there, but you can see our production. We had a good number in metric tons there, 11.3 million metric tons, which is a good number for us. We feel that'll be up. But take a look here, kind of some deal killers I put there at the bottom. If China enters the skirmish, grain sorghum trade will probably stop. That was made pretty clear yesterday by the White House, not sorghum specifically, but China backed off of that really quick, that they had anything to do with this. But keep in mind, this thing has come to a screeching halt before. And then the other thing is this Decree 248, which is basically this wonky set of rules that once those boats get into China, how they're unloaded and what they're unloaded, to make sure their documentation's right. We've seen some grain sorghum that's come under these Decree 248 rules that's just kind of sitting there. The Chinese end users absolutely hate this. They start calling immediately. And here's another interesting thing to point out is is most grain sorghum that we know of that's sold to China is sold FOB. That is, when it hits the boat in the port, it belongs to China, as opposed to some of those SIF terms that they want. So nobody's going to basically sell to China right now. Maybe some of the big guys might take a little risk, but nobody's really wanting to sell to China and extend any credit terms, not because of the credit, but because of that the way that things could come to a screeching halt right now. So all in all, we think we have less than 5 million bushels left in the United States of grain sorghum to sell of old crop. These guys are extremely interested in new crop. This on the right is pretty interesting. The first thing that pops out in my head, these guys don't wear shoes when they produce this mash, which will become baijiu, which is the most consumed liquor in the world. Grain sorghum is to baijiu what agave is to tequila. You can't make one without the other. So a lot of that's a baijiu. We understand more and more is baijiu, but make no mistake, this grain sorghum that's going to China right now is absolutely fueling their pork industry, their hog industry, as it comes back to 100%. We understand it's about 95% of capacity right now of what it was 2 years ago before African swine fever. Our annual meeting next week, we're at the Hilton Austin Airport. On Tuesday, we have a great lineup of speakers. We have an economist with the Federal Reserve Bank out of Dallas talking about fuel. We have a guy talking about alternatives to fertilizer. We also have the latest federal legislation. And then I forgot what else we have there. I'm about out of words right now, Matt. So this is where I'm headed right here. We're moving cattle today and fixing the fence. So I have a little extra smile on my face. That's why. So those are my contact numbers. That's my cell phone number at the top, Matt. You guys give me a call. I got about another 3 hours on the road here, or shoot me an email. Greatly appreciate what you guys do. And Mark and John, really appreciate y'all's comments as well. Fascinating times. And if you're an economist, I'm no economist, but if you're an economist, this really has to pique your interest.
Thank you, Wayne. That was excellent. And I love the picture of the cattle to kind of wrap things up. And nothing better to get your mind right than to go push some leather bags around during the day, right? So good for you. Get away, kind of decompress and do everything a little bit differently for the day. But yeah, thank you for the great information this morning. It's certainly interesting times, and I think the markets are definitely showing that. And we appreciate each of you being with us this morning and your continued interest in this program, because I think there's great value here for our clientele that are out there. So if we don't have any questions from anybody, I will sign off and say, have a great day. Thank you guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
y'all.
Take care.
Thank you, Bob.